A week ago, at the time of writing this Markiplier uploaded a video updating us on where he's been and gave us news regarding his upcoming projects titled The Plan. He imparted some updates on the Iron Lung movie and informed us of a TV series he'd been working on titled The Edge of Sleep. As some of you probably recall, Mark had been the narrator of a podcast of the same name, and while I haven't listened to it myself, I'm fairly certain that the series is directly adapting it. He gave us the release date of October 17th and the platform in which it will be releasing, Prime Video, which can I just say surprised the hell out of me. I hadn't known of this adaptation's existence up until the video's release, but just hearing about it releasing on Prime piqued my interest in the show's quality. Not even a week passes and Mark uploads a second video with the title of The Plan Has Changed. So it turns out that he and Prime Video decided to release the show 2 days early? Which, okay? Since the video came out relatively late, I made the decision to go to bed and watch it the next day. I mean this when I say this, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to watch. I've been following Mark for years and have enjoyed all of his creative endeavors, but I enjoyed this series far more than I was estimating to. I planned to have a completely different video release after my last one, but this was too interesting to ignore. In today's video, I'll be going over the 6-episode long series and give my personal thoughts and feelings on it. Without further ado, try to stay awake as we talk about Markiplier's chilling new series. I will say, while I really love this show, it certainly has a weird start. Most, if not all, of my main complaints that I'll have on the series will derive from this episode. Just stick with me, alright? After a few seconds of a black screen, the camera zooms in on Mark's character, who we currently do not know the name of, on a plane looking very exhausted. Across from him, a woman with pure white eyes blankly looms in the plane aisle. Our camera cuts back and forth between the two until the plane crashes and Mark plunges into the water. Across this sequence and the ones following it, weird visions of just flat out strange, currently unexplained stuff flash in and out. Now, I could reasonably see this frankly strange opening to the episode being a turnoff for some people, and even causing them to drop the series. I personally didn't mind venturing straight into the weird stuff, considering a lot of my interests are trippy psychological related media, but it's something that could be a make or break for general audiences, and I was sure to remember it for this video. Once the intro fully passes, we are then segued back into a similar scene as the first 20 seconds, with weird vision-like imagery flashing moment by moment on screen. Mark's character then stands before a large whale, who demands that he gives up his pills. In fact, there's a very interesting narration that happens just before this encounter that is quite noteworthy. Mark states to either the viewer or himself his fear of sleeping, and that he is always afraid of going to bed. I'll read it for you now. All my life, I've been afraid to go to sleep. Whenever I lay down to close my eyes, that's when the nightmares begin. And lately, they've been getting worse. Just a little something I wanted to bring up before we continued. Now back to the massive whale, Mark's character obliges in giving up what I assume to be pills involving either sleep or tiredness, and the whale vacuums them in. Now I'm sure you can infer this, but these opening visions have a lot of meaning in the story of The Edge of Sleep, and I will bring them up numerous times as they become relevant. Remember all these details I've told you, as both me and the series will be here to remind you of their importance. As a close-up of this whale opening its gargantuan mouth is shown, Mark's character wakes up. Turns out this whole trip of a scene was just a dream. Mark's character Dave was simply just sleeping on his security job like the average minimum wage employee. His coworker Mateo doesn't let him live it down either, as he laughs about it to his face as he plays the security footage of him falling on his ass on the TV. While he's pointing and laughing, he also imparts that Dave was saying something about an elephant whilst dreaming. Who knows? All Mateo cares about is skipping their job and going to this cool party. This segment of the episode really sets up Mateo and Dave's relationship, with Mateo being an extremely vibrant and outgoing personality, and Dave being the more laid-back, troubled one who Mateo is trying to get out there. In one of the following scenes in their work's parking lot, Mateo says that he's bringing Dave to this party in order to make him happier after his recent breakup. The dynamics down the line will set up for some interesting scenes, and immediately introducing us to this dynamic is to the show's benefit. After their parking lot chat, they embark to the Cool Kids party. It seems like a pretty standard kickback type of party upon Mark and Mateo's arrival. You know, loosey-goosey energy, people sprawled on the table from the drugs, typical stuff. All it takes for people to examine this party a little bit more closely is a scuffle between Dave and one of the other partygoers. Dave knocks the asleep man down and the man lands straight on his head. They go to check his pulse and it's completely flatlined. Panic encapsulates this small party and everyone is sent into distress. With quick pace, Dave shouts at Mateo to call the police while he tries to get help for the shut-eyed man. Once he checks upstairs for some others, he finds 2 more people with their bodies in a similar state. Realizing the potential severity of the situation, they load all 3 into their car and book it for the hospital. Not sure exactly what happened to the 3, whether drug overdose or gas leak, the 2 swiftly arrive at their destination to find out. Problem? The place looks like a ghost town. Usually there's lots of movement and people walking about, even outside of a hospital, but no such thing is seen. The visibly distressed nurse who greets them sees the body that they've brought, but has an odd lack of urgency. They are brought in and Dave and Mateo simply take a breather in the waiting room in order to ease their minds as the nurse examines their fellow partygoers. 2 other patients are waiting as well. Giving us a cutaway to the nurses, it's not looking any less stressful for them as it is for our main characters. There's an overabundance of deceased patients and they only have 3 staff left, 2 of which have worked far over their usual hours. From all angles, stress is the only thing that can be seen. As the first episode is nearing its conclusion, we are hit with one last foreboding event. The 2 patients in the waiting room are fully passed out in the blink of an eye. Dave tries to call for help from the nurses from earlier, but when said nurse tries to wake up her coworker from her nap, she's as dead as the patients. And that roller coaster of events is how episode 1 is concluded. This entire episode sets up the series effectively. Despite its oddly fast pacing, it leaves you with intrigue as to what in the world is going on. At the party, you'd never expect something greater to be happening due to people being passed out from drugs at a party is relatively normal. And when it's found out that the partygoers are dead, it could have been either from a simple overdose or the brutal impact of his head on the table, or as Dave explains it to be, a gas leak. The inklings of something greater really hit home with the Hollow Hospital. It has this air of uncanniness, and the show conveys this in such a subtle way. Whenever there's some sort of deathly mystery in the media I watch, I always look out for how they set it up to get the viewer interested in what comes next. Edge of Sleep's method in doing this is effective. The bodies as we pass them, the hospital feeling gutted out other than its limited occupancy, the final moments of the episode, all of this culminates in the interest necessary for a viewer to stay. Episode 1's second half is where my excitement finally started to bubble up. Now, with that being said, I do have one glaring complaint that I'd like to emphasize about this very first episode. Its pacing. I briefly touched on it earlier, but I dislike the speed in which this information is relayed to us in the opening episode. Whether that be because of the limited episode runtime, or just the showrunners themselves making the plot move faster is unknown. Either or, I ended this episode with partial dissatisfaction of how the first episode was handled speed-wise. This is the only episode of the 6 that has this issue, so I won't need to bring this up again. Now that I've gone into detail with how the show has set up its mystery, it's time to fasten my pace and go through how the show unravels it. Here's where the characters begin to craft their tinfoil thinking caps and attempt to explain the grave happenings of the previous episode's events. Like I said at the end of the previous segment, I'm going to go a little faster through events from now on, mainly to save the time of both you and me. Dave, Mateo, and the last remaining nurse, who we find out is named Linda, group up and attempt to brainstorm what's going on. After relaying all the information everyone knows, they cruise around the town in search of anyone that could help them. Just as the hospital had been, you can hear the cold individual particles of breeze swing through the air by the emptiness of the town. Even resorting to out in the open gunshots proved useless in scouting out other survivors. This really got them thinking on what logistically could be happening to the town's residents. An explanation that sticks, which is suggested by Linda, is that some sort of pandemic is spreading that causes any passively infected people to die when entering sleep. That would explain all of the weird happenstances leading up to this point in the story. Obviously, the couple at the party were sleeping together, and the drugged out man passed out. The old man in the waiting room took sleeping pills just before he lost pulse, and the other nurse died during her 15-minute nap. As of right now, this is the most reasonable conclusion to reach, and it gives us a good view of the characters trying to reason with their situation. Our trio's current goal is to try and warn as many of the hypothetically remaining people as possible before the population at large goes to sleep and dies. The local radio station seems like the best bet, so they step on the gas to get there as fast as possible. A very unfortunate engine issue ends up splitting the trio apart, with Mateo and Linda staying to fix the engine in order to reach the radio station, and Dave running off into the vacant town to find someone. I failed to mention this up until this moment, so apologies, but Dave has been thinking about his ex-girlfriend Katie ever since the first episode. You know how I mentioned how he had like a breakup, I guess? Well, yeah, that's that person. And now with this potentially global pandemic, his stress for her safety only continues to rise. With time slowly running out, he takes matters into his own hands and makes a run for her apartment in the chance she's still awake. Before we tread any further, I want to point out Markiplier is one hell of a runner. Like, look at this! His sprint would put fear into me if I saw him doing this in real life. He puts Tom Cruise to shame. He arrives at her doorstep, and when his knock proves no sign of life, he kicks down the door himself and rushes in to check on her. His intruding decision didn't exactly scream friendly, so it led to her hitting him in the head with a metal object. Luckily, she didn't knock him out. Right as she's about to use more force to protect herself, Dave tries to warn her of what's going on. Luckily, Mateo and Linda conveniently made it to the radio station and sent on a warning broadcast just before she could do it. The episode ends with Katie accepting what Dave is telling her is true, and the reality visibly hitting her like a truck. Episode 2 continues the momentum that the first started, if not speeding it up, but not in a pacing way. One of my favorite narrative tropes in media like this is seeing the character's explanation for a currently unknown mystery. The solution that has been provided by the show at this point still has a lot of ambiguity to it. Ambiguity? Ambiguity? This word, that's the word I'm trying to say. The list of unknowns about this quote-unquote pandemic is still large. How did this virus start? How did it spread? Is it even a virus at all? Stuff like that. Linda's idea of what's happening fits all its surrounding pieces right now, but the majority of the puzzle is still left to be placed together. And with us being only in episode 2 of 6, I believe we have an amped amount of time to find the right pieces. After my recap of the first 2 episodes, I want to take a different approach when covering these last 4. Instead of doing a recap again, I'm going to go straight into the analysis portion for all 4 episodes. If you haven't watched the series yet and were captivated by the concepts and story that I talked about in the previous 2 recaps, I urge you to go and see it for yourself first, then return to hear my full analysis. I can't force you, but it's for the best that you do this, because I will be going into full spoiler territory. We cool? Cool. As I stated earlier, I love seeing characters' in-universe attempts at unraveling a spooky mystery with coming up with their own explanations along the way. The next 4 episodes do this just as well as the second did. What I love about how Edge of Sleep does it is how natural and smooth the progression itself feels. From learning that people are dying by going to sleep, they try to find the root cause of it, leading to them going forward with an autopsy on one of the dead bodies at the hospital, which reminds Dave of his dreams due to the triangle inscribed on the person's brain. The idea that this may have something to do with Dave's dreams comes to fruition whenever Linda examines the old woman's dying moments, and they find out that she died specifically during her dreams. Then Dave finds out in his dream about the island they need to fly to in order to be safe. Each method on this timeline reasonably leads to the next, and the characters themselves use good logic to infer the best course of action after testing another method. It perfectly mimics the butterfly effect, with one thing causing, or in this case revealing, another. As a viewer, it really got me hooked on what they'd try next and what the results of them trying would lead to. This also helped Edge of Sleep's world building as well. Over time, whether through Dave's dreams or just the character's experimentations, we saw glimpses of what could have been happening. It kept amping up until finally giving us the truth at the very end. I only felt satisfaction after the payoff was given. Speaking of which, I want to touch up on the concepts and ideas played with for Edge of Sleep. The idea of a global disease or effect that kills you when you sleep, while intriguing in itself, is a simple one. What makes it stand out is how the showrunners expand on this and see how far they can stretch this core concept to make it narratively satisfying. At first, it very much seems like a deadly disease with no magical elements at play. Only after 6 whole episodes is the concept finally clear. How the showrunners tackled the task of making a simple idea fully fleshed out, for lack of a better term, was cool. We find out that an external force has been hellbent on ensuring that every human on Earth falls to this spell of some sort. Only the spooky sleep cult and the great whales have been shielding the Earth from its grasp. It only just now broke through after countless attempts, and it managed to wipe out nearly everyone in one fell swoop. Now, if we compare this explanation of what's been going on to the one that we were given by the characters in episode 2, they're not close in the slightest. The vast difference between them is due to, again, the writers building an exposition city on top of a concept plateau. What a weird metaphor. That's what makes this show so good. Not only is the idea itself both fascinating and terrifying, but the show itself reveals this all to us in a slow but satisfying manner, and it's fleshed out as we go. I feel very strongly about what the writers did for the show, and it gave me a lot to love after the show hooked me. To go at this point even more, the show foreshadowed elements of the final explanation in a number of points in the show. The main area in which foreshadowing is fully present is, you guessed it, Dave Strange's dream sequences. Fun fact, you probably noticed it, but the first episode's dream opening actually showed us a glimpse at the events of episode 5 when they're on the plane. Dave has visions of both Katie without her pupils and the plane crashing, the exact same set of events from episode 5. They planted that seed at the very beginning, and the payoff is huge whenever we watch up to that moment in the 5th episode. His dreams have even more to unpack about later events. If you recall, I told you to remember the details of that first dream sequence. Well, we've hit the point where I'm bringing it up again! The whale that consumes all of Dave's sleeping pills is very clear foreshadowing to the twist at the very end of The Edge of Sleep, where it's explained to us that the whale is the sleep protector of the globe. Again, love them subtly adding this early on for us to see. The sleep cult is also similarly foreshadowed, with them appearing nearly every time Dave decides to doze off. The best aspect about their foreshadowing has to be how they're presented. They seemed, at least to me, like an evil force of some kind, and gave me the vibes of an antagonistic group that worked directly against our characters. For a while, I began to think that they were the cause of what was happening with everyone in their dreams, and that they deliberately enabled the mass sleep death that we saw. Then again, it also might have had to do with nearly every cult and psychological/horror media being evil and planting the root of every problem. It was only until the latter half of the series where this was debunked and we learned that they were a force of good. Our expectations, similar to the other parts of the show that I've brought up already, were intentionally shattered. Props once more to the writers for this. My very last thing to bring up appreciation for are the show's visuals. For all of Markiplier's past projects, the cinematography consisted of just first-person adventures, and they were meant to emulate you, the viewer, being present in the environment. I really had no frame of reference for this one, nor did I know what to expect. Full transparency, I'm shocked at the quality that this series' visuals have. I mean, sure, it was funded by Amazon, but a lot more effort was put into nailing how everything looks and feels than I thought it would. And plus, Amazon had Invincible, and those visuals have been talked about a bunch, so it's kind of just a mixed bag. Many of the camera shots used look stunning, especially in episode 2 with the empty town. I don't know what it is, but the color of these shots really pop for some reason. This is probably a me thing, but I remember them being oddly pleasant to view. For the most part, the CGI looks nice as well. I wouldn't say it's the best, but it's good enough to pass. Some of the 3D animations look a tad jank or clunky, but it's not that big of a deal. My favorite parts of the visuals have to be the designs used. What I mean by this is some of the characters and environments. For instance, let's take into example Dave's local sleep paralysis demon, the elephant. Its face is so grotesque and inhuman, but it has the oddity of it vaguely being capable of an elephant comparison, hence the name. It almost looks as if its flesh bubbled up from the inside. The sunken-in eyes that have a veil of dark shadow over them and give an extra layer of disturbing to this monster. This design truly struck me with just how unsettling it turned out to be. This example truly personifies what Edge of Sleep does to make sure that its oddity and disturbing elements remain remembered by the audience. Throughout this larger than usual video for me, I hope that I successfully conveyed the striking elements that The Edge of Sleep has to offer. From the story's smoother than butter progression and mystery to its surprisingly impressive visuals, The Edge of Sleep was a treat to experience until the end. With its eluding ending, I only hope that Amazon decides to renew it for a second season. What the end implicates makes me itch to see what happens next. If/when we get more episodes, expect me to cover it. And if Amazon doesn't renew it for more episodes, expect to see me on the news. Thank you so much for watching. I very much appreciate your viewership and I'm glad you stuck around. With the holidays, I sorta had no time to get this out, which explains the 3 months between my past 2 video essays, so I apologize. I've been hard at work on the next one, so let's hope I can get on schedule. Well, that's all for me. Until next time, cheers!